Jerome Corsi received a PhD from Harvard University in political science in 1972. He is currently a senior staff reporter for WorldNet Daily, where he works as an investigative journalist. For over 10 years, Dr. Corsi has been developing internet-based financial marketing firms. He possesses keen insight into the financial industry, which, when combined with his extensive understanding of politics, has made him one of the most credible political commentators in the world. He writes a weekly subscription newsletter entitled Red Alert on strategic economic issues. He is also the author of the #1 New York Times best-selling books, The Abomination, Leftist Politics and the Cult of Personality, and America for Sale, The Late Great USA, among other books. He's visited with us before. Let's welcome back to the Global Freedom Report, Dr. Jerome Corsi. Jerome, how are you?
I'm doing great, Brent. It's good to be back with you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you. You're a senior staff reporter for WorldNet Daily. Now, I remember when Joe Farah first started it, and it seems like so long ago. How has WorldNet Daily evolved over the years, and how do you see it? What role do you see it taking during the current times?
I've been with WorldNet Daily since 2008. I joined in 2008. And I started, actually, really before. I mean, I think about 2004. I go back to 2004 with WND. I've been a senior staff reporter since about 2006. So I've been 8 years with WND and 6 years as a senior staff reporter. WND always, to me, Joseph Farah, people got to understand, Joseph Farah, first of all, is a journalist. He's trained as a journalist. He created WND as a journalist. It's as rigorous, if not more so, than any newspaper I ever worked on. Just because it's an internet doesn't mean the standards of reporting aren't very high. They are. And the way it's evolved is, I think today WND is positioned to become one of the premier news sites period, worldwide. We've got somewhere between 8 to 10 million readers every month, and the site is growing all the time. And I think our reporting, I'm honored to be working with WND, and the reporting in general, I think, is at a very high standard. So it's certainly one of the news sources I can rely on, and for reporting that other people do, as well as, a great source for me to report the work I'm doing myself. So I think compared to where you see the New York Times and the Washington Post and the major networks all becoming political news, partisan news, and people not listening to them or watching them. At the same time, WND is just growing tremendously, and our credibility is so high in the honesty of our reporting.
Now, when you have such popularity and such credibility combined, there is a clear temptation to use that to exert influence. Now, we could debate whether or not it's appropriate for a news organization to exert influence or just report, and I could take either side of that question. But what do you think? Do you think, as we go through the turmoil, politically, economically, socially, the upheaval that's happening in the U.S. and around the world and into the future, what role do you anticipate, do you see WND playing?
Well, I think WND is going to be a major force. I think WND in the next, if you project out over 10 or 20 years, I think WND will be one of the major news sources worldwide, and will replace in print publications. I'm not sure the New York Times will survive, even as an online newspaper, because again, it's so leftist, it's so biased, it's so politically oriented in terms of its partisanship. I think the less control over the government and over the universities is a passing phase. I think this can be considered to be one of the darkest epochs in American journalistic and university history. We're producing students, our major sources of news, including the AP and the UPI, which, I used to have tremendous respect for, have just become political. And you can easily discount whether the reports are even worth reading. And increasingly, the vast majority, I haven't read the New York Times since the Vietnam War.
The race is on. Election 2012 is moving forward full steam ahead. Now, there's so many stories connected with the upcoming election, I hardly know where to start. The first presidential debate was held last week. How do you think the candidates did?
Well, I think, Brent, that it was clearly a win for George Romney. I mean, Romney was, I thought, Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney was absolutely, crushed Obama. Obama, didn't show up at the debate. He looked despondent. He looked at his feet. He looked at the podium. He looked confused. His mind wasn't working. He seemed to wonder in his answers. I mean, the overwhelming response to this debate, every poll I've seen is 2/3 of the people who watched it, including myself, felt that Obama was just, subpar. And I think it's very alarming because I think I see a deterioration in Obama. I think Obama is really suffering from the effects of drug abuse and maybe some illnesses. I'm actually very seriously researching if there could be a mental disability, because I think this issue of Obama's inability to speak without a teleprompter is a serious issue. And I think that we're facing, a president who will not release his medical records. And I'm becoming alarmed that Obama may be at a point where he's suffering such mental disability or early stages of a disease like Parkinson's, which again can be cocaine-induced. But I'm very seriously researching these issues right now.
Hey, that's great. Let us know what you come up with. In all honesty, it's not a very nice thing to say, but I think there would be some kind of divine retribution if indeed he's suffering from something or other because of the suffering he has caused so many others. Gary Johnson's a libertarian candidate for president. He's filed an antitrust lawsuit due to being excluded from the debates. What are your thoughts on the exclusion of all but the Democrat and Republican candidates in these debates? Aren't the American people entitled to see and hear all the candidates at these events?
We have to go on about the Constitution Party candidate, who I think, again, is always excluded from these debates. The attempt by the establishment, which is, essentially what we've got is a political establishment, both media and government, to maintain a two-party system. I think it's to the detriment of our politics. There should be. I'd like to see a robust third party, and maybe more than three, because the American people are being pushed into Republican or Democratic, and what happens, Republican and Democratic are like the same party. I mean, it's like the Republicans are more the conservative wing of the Democratic Party. The two parties work in such conjunction that I think it limits the agenda and it limits the perspective of views or the perspective of political arguments that are considered legitimate or permitted in Washington. I mean, Ron Paul is a good example. Ron Paul, I think, would be wonderful at these debates, and his views should be heard. And we should have the potential to have 4 or 5 candidates for presidency at any time on the ballot. That, I think, would open up our politics.
Well, now, what I find interesting is that there have been lawsuits of this type before, but they've always failed. But this is, as far as I know, the first time a candidate has brought a lawsuit based on an antitrust violation. The premise being that the organization behind the debates is a commercial organization, therefore they're under the laws of commerce, therefore antitrust becomes a factor. Do you think that this, as a legal strategy, might actually be successful?
Well, I think it should be pursued. I would encourage it. Virgil Goode, who is, of course, the Constitution Party candidate, former member of Congress, and again, I do think that there's some antitrust and the issues here. I think there's some restrictions of free press and free speech and some political effort, restrictions of association rights. If we had a rethinking of the issue, I'd like to see some legal suits. I'd like to see Gary bring some legal suits. Look, the Libertarian Party is a growing party in the United States. There's no question that the entire Libertarian point of view, and I think the Constitution Party's point of view, with the Tea Party movement, these are two growing perspectives of political difference that diverge considerably from the mainstream Republican Party views. And what you end up having is libertarians or constitutionalists forced to support Republican candidates or to have default wins for Democrats. Usually these days are so far to the left. Increasingly, the Democratic Party has been hijacked by the far left. The Democratic Party of Lyndon Johnson, or even certainly Jack Kennedy and Hubert Humphrey, that Democratic Party's gone. And these Democratic candidates think far more redistribution of income, far more like socialists or Marxists. Even though I call themselves progressives, they're fundamentally socialists.
Progressive is the proper word. We say progressive today. We don't say socialist.
Progressive is the word. That's the word they want to use.
Yes, of course.
Which is a nice euphemism for, I think, socialist.
Yeah. Oh, of course.
And
of course.
And I mean, I think I don't think the Libertarian Party or the Constitution Party are going to go away. I think that these are growing viewpoints in the American population that, are shared by millions of people and have legitimate points of view that ought to be argued. And certainly, when it comes to issues, for instance, in foreign policy, just for an example, there's tremendous disagreement among libertarians and Constitutional Party, which tend to be closer to each other than traditional Republican Party. The traditional Republican, you can see it in people like Buchanan, you can see it.
Yeah, no, and these are definitely perspectives that should be voiced and all that.
It should be voiced.
Yeah,
and they should be able to be on the ballot, and they should be able to be on the debate.
Yeah,
because American people don't understand that these are legitimate political differences, and they range. I'd say the social issues and the foreign policy issues. Even Republicans were conservative fiscally, and I don't think Republicans are necessarily conservative fiscally. I think they just want to spend. Typically, the Republican establishment is as free as Democrats. They just don't want to spend quite as much.
And on different things, absolutely. But
I'm saying the traditional Republican Party establishment wants big government. They just want a different kind of big government than Democrats.
Exactly. I've got a ton of questions. I want to see if I can get through them in time. I want to talk to you about polling for a moment, because you're a journalist. Polling data, I'm sure you know, is relatively easy to manipulate. So personally, I seldom look at polls to determine anything. However, it's really hard not to do so during a presidential campaign. Democrat organization polls show Obama in the lead. Republican organization polls show Romney ahead. Are there any polls out there that are more reflective of what is really going on?
Yes, and I taught, I have a PhD from Harvard Political Science, and I taught statistics at the university level when I first got out of graduate school. And so, yes, polling is extremely easy to skew, especially when you've got to have some model to how many Democrats, how many Republicans are going to be in your mix. And if you're right now, the polls have been using leftist skewed. They've been using the 2008 presidential election as their model. The presidential election 2008 was about +8 for Democrats because of the enthusiasm for Obama being the first black president. That's worn off. You can only be first black president once, and the registration for Democrats right this year across the board is about 20% down. So I think 2010 would have been a much better model. That's probably 2+ for Republican. But among the current pollsters, Rasmussen seems to be the most reliable because he's polling likely voters, not just even registered voters, people likely to vote, and he's got better methodologies for determining who those likely voters are, what the mix of likely voting is going to be. There's a new site I'm watching very carefully. It's called unskewedpolls.com, unskewedpolls.com, and it seems to be very interesting. And so I'm watching it very carefully. And,
keep an eye out.
You've got to understand that the way polling is done by the mainstream media is almost worthless because, like the mainstream media itself, the polls are designed increasingly to tell Republicans supporting Romney that Romney's already lost and just give up, when nothing could be farther from the truth. Romney's doing extremely well. Since the debate, I think he's going to surge in the polls. And if Obama does not recover in this next debate, Romney could get a commanding lead. The Democrats' internal polls, if you really want to know what the polls should be, watch what the candidates do. Obama and Biden have been in Ohio so many times in the last 6 weeks. You know that their internal polls in the Democratic Party do not show that Romney is losing by 10 points in Ohio. If they showed that...
If they did, they wouldn't be in Ohio. No, you're absolutely...
They wouldn't be in Ohio.
You're absolutely right. Now, there is a mountain of evidence, and I have looked into this myself as an investigator. There is a mountain of evidence pointing to the conclusion that Barack Obama is constitutionally disqualified from running for president. He is not a natural-born citizen. Now, I understand that the arguments on all sides, all that, but based on just the evidence, why isn't Romney using this in his campaign?
Well, I think the deal is that Romney should be. The thing is that some issues just get marked by the mainstream as being kind of too threatening or too oddball. And so this one, it goes right to the heart of who Obama is, the not eligible to be president. And Obama can't defend the issue because they won't show the original birth materials that Hawaii has in the vault. So you know he's lying.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a fundamental lie that the lie exposes that the mainstream media did not do its job vetting this guy. The big story this year is going to be the mainstream media didn't do its job. I'm running articles now on what has been known. I've finally gotten sources coming forward on it and being absolutely clear sources in Chicago. The evidence is overwhelming that Obama's homosexual. The marriage to Michelle is arranged. I've started to release the articles in WND. No question about it. I don't see any. I've got the names of his lovers.
But I'll tell you, that concerns me less than the issue of the disqualification. And to me, it would seem like a no-brainer. If I was running against the man, the first thing I would do, even if it was poo-pooed by a lot of mainstream media, the fact that I was having a political campaign using this issue as impetus would put doubt in the minds of the people. It would question Obama. People can't help it. You can't help it when you start hearing about it. It seems like such an obvious tactic, and I just don't understand why it's not being used.